Hello, good morning, and welcome back to Muse Reads Tolkien, the Silmarillion. We'll get started in just a minute once some folks pop in. Hello, Phil. Good morning. Let's see here. We're just giving it a few minutes for folks to hop in and chilling while we wait. Let's see here. Hello, Mighty Blue. Rice, welcome. Good morning. We'll give it another minute and then we'll get started. Hey, Katsuki and Lyric, thanks for joining us. Before we start reading today, I guess we can go ahead and get started on that. I thought we'd do a quick kind of study session on some of the things that we've discussed already. Since there is so much going on in this book, if you would like to download the cheat sheets that I've made here, there's a link in the description. It should let you download it. If it doesn't, let me know. But yeah, while we wait for folks, I thought we'd look at this. So we are reading the Silmarillion, which is Tolkien's kind of mythic explanation for how the world of the Lord of the Rings came into being. And it starts with the gods singing the universe into existence. Ilúvatar is the big man. He's the god of the gods, the one god, but he creates a pantheon of lower gods called the Valar, who are the ones that actually kind of go down into the physical world and interact with the elves and people. Pippin, what are you doing? Pippin's causing trouble. And there's 14 of those gods. They are listed there. The dudes on the left, the women on the right. The ones that are important are the ones that I left blank. The yellowed out ones are, you really don't ever hear much about them. They don't matter all that much. It shows who they're married to, and then the bottom has the two that were never married. Let's go to the next slide. So this is all their powers. Manwë is king god, rules wind and birds. Varda is stars, that's his wife, and ocean is Ulmo, all the different things they do. And then some of them are siblings. Melkor is obviously the bad guy. King god Manwë is his brother. Manwë and Melkor kind of have a Michael and Satan thing going on. Yavanna is siblings with Fauna. Doesn't matter. Nenya, Mandos. Some of this is just like, if you want to know it, that's cool. You don't have to. It's not too important. But, like I said, the slides are down below if you want to download them. This I thought was cool. I thought I'd give a better idea of what the world actually looks like. Tolkien's world is not a globe. It is kind of a floating continent within a sphere of energy, of life, sphere of life. There's a sea that circles the world, Akaya. There's a veil that covers the world in air. I can't remember what the veil is called. Outside the veil is the void and the doors of night. So the way that Tolkien's world looks, the way he describes his world, is actually more like this. It's not a globe, it's a floating continent. Arda is the name of the whole world. Middle-earth is one of the continents, the one from a lot of the books. Aman is the western continent, the Undying Lands where all the gods live. That is a big portion of the stories in the Silmarillion. How do siblings work if they were all created by Eru? Wouldn't they all be siblings? To an extent. Basically, they're siblings if Tolkien says they are. And that's because, gods and pantheons in mythology often do have siblings, like Loki and Thor are brothers. And so basing his works off of mythology that has come before, he does have a lot of characters that he names as siblings. And if you, as we've read the Silmarillion the past couple days, he will literally just say, the god of dreams was Lorien, and his brother was Mandos. No more explanation than that. So basically, they are brothers or sisters if he wants them to be. Next slide. I thought it'd be a good idea. I pulled out my Atlas of Middle-earth because I'm an enormous nerd, and I took a couple pictures. That's what the world looks like right now. In the middle is Middle-earth at the top, and below it is the Hitherlands, which are like lower Middle-earth. It's sort of the continent in the middle of the world is where all the mortals and the elves and the children of Iluvatar live. There's another continent that way. I don't think we ever really deal with it. I don't think he ever really discusses what's going on over there. Aman, the continent where all the gods live, is the one to the left there. Alright. We're not going to deal with this right now, but that is Beleriand, which is where a lot of the stories we're going to read are going to be there. So I put the map there as well. This is Aman. This is what it looks like. Gives you something of an idea of what the land of the gods looks like. The Pelori, there's like this big mountain range right on the sea, so that, they raised this wall of mountains so that the bad guys couldn't get them. Good morning, Jeff. And then there's some important places kind of named. Tenequetl is this big mountain in the middle of the range where Manwe, King God, has his throne. It's where he chills out. Tirion on Tuna is the city of the Noldor elves. It's fancy crystal city, whatever. Oresia, that little island, is where the sea elves live, the Teleri. The Guardians of Lorien are just the Gardens of Dreams. Dream God lives there. I don't know that they do a lot with that. Valmar is where the Valar live. It's where those two fancy trees are that give light to everything. And the Halls of Mandos are where the Death God lives. That's where all the spirits of the dead go to await their reincarnation. The Maiar, those are the minor angels and demigods. Most of them aren't important. Osei was kind of important, the ocean god that helped the Teleri, the sea elves. Melian is the one that fell in love with an elf and stayed in Middle-earth. And Aloran will later be known as Gandalf. Obviously will be important later. I tried to map out the different kinds of elves that Tolkien names. Like I said, the reason that the clans kind of exist is, one, he wanted to explain the various linguistic changes he was making, but also, as we're about to continue the story today, you'll start to see the different clans fight and have problems with each other. So the clans are separate. He differentiates between these different elves so that that's a little bit of backstory to why they're going to start having problems with each other. Quendi was all elves. That was the name for all elves when they first woke up. The Eldar are the ones that went to Aman. They went to see the light. They went to hang out with the gods. The Avari are the ones that said, "Fuck that shit. We're gonna hang out in Middle-earth. We're gonna just chill over here." If you go down the Eldar branch, you get three groups. The Vanyar are the church study group. They're the ones that went to the west and stayed there. They loved the gods so much they said, "We're just gonna chill here forever." The Teleri are the boat. The sea elves. They like the ocean. Noldor are the craftsmen. They're going to be the most important group. Now, if you go down the Teleri branch, it breaks down even further, because the Teleri were like a huge group of elves, and different parts of the Teleri hung out at different parts of the sea. The Philathrim stayed in Middle-earth. They were gonna come to the west. They were like, yeah, this sounds like fun, but then they got to the ocean, and they were like, you know what, we're just gonna chill here. We're just going to chill here on the side of the ocean. The Eglath were going to go to to Aman, and they got left behind on accident, so they got stuck in Middle-earth. The Sindar are the group that hang out with King Thingol, who we will hear more of later. He's the elf that got lost in the woods and fell in love with the pretty lady, the wizard, Melian. So the Sindar are his clan of elves. The Nandor are another group led by a guy named Linway. Basically, those 4 groups are Teleri who didn't make it to the west. There's a bunch of Teleri who did, so there's a bunch of Teleri who are in Amon, in the fancy godland. The ones that didn't make it are Philathrim, Eglath, Sindar. The ones that you're going to hear the most about are probably the Sindar, because Thingol is a really important king, and he's going to come up later. When they split, did they stop being Quendi, or is that a thing where the Eldar and Avari are subgroups of Quendi? Good question. The Eldar and Avari are subgroups of Quendi. Quendi basically means elf. Any elf is a Quendi. Quendi was like the word, it meant those who speak. Like when they first learned to speak, they called themselves the Quendi. That is fancy word for elf. Eldar are just the ones that went west and turned out all magical and fancy. So yeah, I tried to make it a little more... There's a far more complicated guide on the internet that covers all the terms he uses for his elves. I decided not to include it because it's so overwhelming and confusing, because he has all these different words in different languages for what the elves are and what group they're in. This is basically the most basic you can get with what the elves are. Because there's Mora Quendi, the Dark Elves, there's Kala Quendi, the Light Elves, and they are this, and they are that. Don't worry about it. Elf Kings! So this is not too important, but just I figured I'd mention it. Ingwe, King of the Vanyar Church Group. Finway's the most important, he's the King of the Noldor, the Craftsman. Elwë and Olwë were the kings of the Teleri. Elwë is the one that fell in love with Melian and hung back. He will now be called Thingol, his new name. And then Lenwë is another, he's just another dude. He left and created the Nandor. I don't even know that they matter. I don't think they come up. At least not right now. Now we got the family tree. Finwë is the king of the Noldor. The Noldor are the craftsmen. They're the group that we're really gonna get into the history of today. He's the guy that had 2 wives and had some kids, and those kids are gonna have some problems with each other. His first wife, he had Fëanor, who's like this great hero with, you know, he's so talented and smart and awesome, and he's gonna cause problems. Fëanor gets married and has 7 kids, and we'll learn more about them later. He has kids. Finwë gets married to another elf, Indis of the Vanyar, and has 2 more sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin. I love Fingolfin. That name is just, hey, where are you going? I'm Fingolfin. It just makes me laugh. And then they had kids. That's not going to be too important right now. Galadriel is one of them, and that is the same Galadriel that's in Lord of the Rings. What's mostly important is that these branches, the Fëanor side and the Fingolfin Finarfin side, are going to have problems with each other. They are not going to get along, and that's what we're getting to today. Yep, so that's everything. Those slides are in the description. You can download them if you want to keep those cheat sheets. You can also Google and find some cheat sheets to like the elf family trees and the types of elves. A lot of them are a little more detailed than I went into because he has a lot of detail in his works. So if you want to check that out, I would also, you can do that. So we're going to get started reading. Get my water. Alright. I remember elves in Lord of the Rings not having many kids. Is that a thing where Fëanor having a lot of children is unusual? It's more of a thing where elves tend to not have children when there is war and strife. And right now, the world's at peace, so everybody's having kids, everybody's getting married. That will change, and you will see later generations will not have, like Galadriel has 1 daughter, I think. Most of the elves later on will have less children, probably because there's a lot more trouble going on. But yes, that is, a lot of the elves in the early ages had many, many, many children. Fëanor specifically. Chapter 7 of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor. We have a cat at the door that's sad that he didn't get invited to our party. And my phone is ringing. Everything's happening. What's up? Madam is reading this stream thing. What's up? Come in, Bob. Bob, come here. I'm in my room. Yeah, Bob wanted in. I do want to help. I do want to help? Okay.
I left out the word "my" in the first sentence, and it sounds like I'm Russian. Instead of "you're my favorite hero," "you're my hero," or something.
Okay. Alright, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, bye.
Love you, bye. She's so funny. Alright. Here we go. Chapter 7 of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor. In that time were made those things that afterwards were most renowned of all the works of the elves. For Fëanor, being come to his full might, was filled with a new thought, or it may be that some shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near. And he pondered how the light of the trees, the glory of the blessed realm, might be preserved imperishable. Then he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore, and his power, and his subtle skill, and at the end of all he made the Silmarils. So remember that there are those two trees, the two fancy trees that light up the world, made from the remains of the lamps that were destroyed by Melkor. He is making some fancy gems from the lights of those trees. As three great jewels they were in form, but not until the end, when Fëanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting, and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls shall it be known of what substance they were made. Like the crystal of diamonds it appeared, yet was more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils, but as is the body to the children of Ilúvatar, the house of its inner fire, that is within it and yet in all parts of it, and is life. And the inner fire of the Silmarils Fëanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda. And yet, as they were indeed living things, they rejoiced in light, and received it, and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. All who dwelt in Aman were filled with wonder and delight at the work of Fëanor, and Varda hallowed the Silmarils, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them, but it was scorched and withered. And Mandos foretold that the fates of Arda, earth, sea, and air lay locked within them. The heart of Fëanor was fast bound to these things that he himself had made. Then Melkor lusted for the Silmarils, and the very memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. From that time forth, inflamed by this desire, he sought ever more eagerly how he should destroy Fëanor and end the friendship of the Valar and the elves. But he dissembled his purposes with cunning, and nothing of his malice could yet be seen in the semblance that he wore. Long was he at work, and slow at first, and barren was his labor. But he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil indeed, while others reap and sow in his stead. Ever Melkor found some ears that would heed him, and some tongues that would enlarge what they had heard, and his lies passed from friend to friend, as secrets of which the knowledge proves the teller wise. Bitterly did the Noldor atone for the folly of their open ears in the days that followed after. So, Fëanor has created some really awesome stones. He did say that they are alive. They are a living thing, and they are made from the light of the two trees, which is basically the last remnants of the radiance of God. These are really important, not just because they're pretty, but because they literally hold divinity within them. And so Melkor wants them, and he's being a dick. When he saw that many leaned towards him, Melkor would often walk among them, and amid his fair words others were woven, so subtly that many who heard them believed in recollection that they arose from their own thought. Visions he would conjure in the hearts of the mighty realms, that they could have ruled at their own will in power and freedom in the east. And then whispers went abroad that the Valar had brought the Eldar to Aman because of their jealousy, fearing that the beauty of the Quendi and the Maker's power that Iluvatar had bequeathed to them would grow too great for the Valar to govern, as the elves waxed and spread over the wide lands of the world. In those days, moreover, though the Valar knew indeed of the coming of men that were to be, the elves as yet knew naught of it, for Manwë had not revealed it to them. But Melkor spoke to them in secret of mortal men, seeing how the silence of the Valar might be twisted to evil. Little he knew yet concerning men, for engrossed with his own thought in the music, he had paid small heed to the third theme of Iluvatar. But now the whisper went among the elves that Manwë held them captive, so that men might come and supplant them in the kingdoms of Middle-earth, for the Valar saw that they might more easily sway this short-lived and weaker race, defrauding the elves of the inheritance of Iluvatar. Small truth there was in this, and little have the Valar ever prevailed to sway the wills of men, but many of the Noldor believed, or half-believed, the evil words. Thus, ere the Valar were aware, the peace of Valinor was poisoned. The Noldor began to murmur against them, and many became filled with pride, forgetting how much of what they knew had come from them in gift from the Valar. Fiercest burned the new flame of desire for freedom and wider realms in the eager heart of Fëanor, and Melkor laughed in his secrecy, for to that mark his lies had been addressed, hating Fëanor above all, and lusting ever for the Silmarils. But these he was not suffered to approach, for though at great feasts Fëanor would wear them blazing on his brow, at other times they were guarded close, locked in the deep chambers of his hoard in Tirion. For Fëanor began to love the Silmarils with a greedy love, and grudged the sight of them to all save his father and 7 sons. He seldom remembered now that the light within them was not his own. High princes were Fëanor and Fingolfin, the elder sons of Finwë, honored by all in Aman, but now they grew proud and jealous each of his rights and his possessions. Then Melkor set new lies abroad in Eldamar, and whispers came to Fëanor that Fingolfin and his sons were plotting to usurp the leadership of Finwë and the elder line of Fëanor, and to supplant them by leave of the Valar. For the Valar were ill-pleased that the Silmarils lay in Tirion and were not committed to their keeping. But to Fingolfin and Finarfin it was said, "Beware, small love has the proud son of Miriel ever had for the children of Indis. Now he is become great, and he has his father in his hand. It will not be long before he drives you forth from Tuna." So Melkor's been spreading all these lies and these murmurs about how the Valar don't trust the elves, that they are trying to control them, that they are prisoners here, and then specifically to Finwë's children, he's putting them against each other. Those 2 clans, the ones from the 2 different wives, he has made it so that the one side, Fëanor, thinks the other brothers are working against him. The other brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin, think Fëanor is working against them. So Melkor is turning everyone against each other. And when Melkor saw that these lies were smoldering, and that pride and anger were awake among the Noldor, he spoke to them concerning weapons. And in that time the Noldor began the smithying of swords and axes and spears. Shields also they made, displaying the tokens of many houses and kindreds that vied one with another. And these only they wore abroad, and of other weapons they did not speak, for each believed that he alone had received the warning. And Fëanor made a secret forge, of which not even Melkor was aware, and there he tempered fell swords for himself and for his sons, and made tall helms with plumes of red. Bitterly did Matan rue the day when he taught to the husband of Nerdanel all the lore of metalwork he had learned from Eöl. Thus, with lies and evil whisperings and false counsel, Melkor kindled the hearts of the Noldor to strife, and of their quarrels came at length the end of the high days of Valinor and the evening of its ancient glory. For Fëanor now began openly to speak words of rebellion against the Valar, crying aloud that he would depart from Valinor back to the world without, and would deliver the Noldor from thraldom if they would follow him. Then there was great unrest in Tirion, and Finwë was troubled, and he summoned all his lords to council. But Fingolfin hastened to his halls and stood before him, saying, King and father, wilt thou not restrain the pride of our brother, who is called the Spirit of Fire all too truly? By what right does he speak for all of our people as if he were king? Thou it was who long ago spoke before the Quendi, bidding them accept the summons of the Valar to Aman, though it was that led the Noldor upon the long road through the perils of Middle-earth to the light of the Eldamar. If thou dost not now repent of it, 2 sons at least thou hast to honor thy words. But even as Fingolfin spoke, Fëanor strode into the chamber, and he was fully armed, his high helm upon his head, and at his side a mighty sword. So it is even as I guessed, he said. My half-brother would be before me with my father in this as in all other matters. Then, turning upon Fingolfin, he drew his sword, crying, Get thee gone, and take thy due place. Fingolfin bowed before Finwë, and without word or glance to Fëanor, he went from the chamber. But Fëanor followed him, and at the door of the king's house he stayed him, and the point of his bright sword he set upon Fingolfin's breast. See, half-brother, he said, this is sharper than thy tongue. Try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls. These words were heard by many, for the house of Finwë was in the great square beneath the Minden. But again Fingolfin made no answer, and passing up through the throng in silence, he went to seek Finarfin his brother. Now the unrest of the Noldor was not indeed hidden from the Valar, but its seed had been sown in the dark, and therefore, since Fëanor first spoke openly against them, they judged that he was the mover of discontent, being eminent in self-will and arrogance, though all the Noldor had become proud. And Manwë was grieved, but he watched and said no word. The Valar had brought the Eldar to their land freely to dwell or to depart, and though they might judge departure to be folly, they might not restrain them from it. But now the deeds of Fëanor could not be passed over, and the Valar were angered and dismayed, and he was summoned to appear before them at the gates of Valmar, to answer for his words and deeds. There also were summoned all others who had any part in this matter, or any knowledge of it, and Fëanor, standing before Mandos in the Ring of Doom, was commanded to answer all that was asked of him. There at last the root was laid bare, and the malice of Melkor revealed, and straightway Tolkis left the council to lay hands upon him and bring him again to judgment. But Fëanor was not held guiltless, for it was he who had broken the peace of Valinor and drawn his sword upon his kinsman. And Mandos said to him, Thou speakest of thraldom. If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it. For Manwë is king of Arda and not of Aman only, and this deed was unlawful, whether in Aman or not in Aman. Therefore this doom is now made. For 12 years thou shalt leave Tirion where this threat was uttered. In that time take counsel with thyself, and remember who and what thou art. But after that time this matter shall be set in peace and held redressed, if others will release thee. Then Fingolfin said, I will release my brother. But Fëanor spoke no word in answer, standing silent before the Valar. Then he turned and left the council, and departed from Valmar. So, they finally figured out Melkor was lying and causing trouble with everybody. But because Fëanor drew his sword on his brother, and there had not been any kind of violence in this place before, he and his family are banished. With him into banishment went his 7 sons, and northward in Valinor they made a strong place and treasury in the hills, and there at Formenos a multitude of gems were laid in hoard, and weapons also, and the Silmarils were shut in a chamber of iron. Thither also came Finwë the king, because of the love he bore to Fëanor, and Fingolfin ruled the Noldor in Tirion. Thus the lies of Melkor were made true in seeming, though Fëanor by his own deeds had brought this thing to pass, and the bitterness that Melkor had sowed endured, and lived long afterwards between the sons of Fingolfin and Fëanor. Now Melkor, knowing that his devices had been revealed, hid himself, and passed from place to place as a cloud in the hills, and Tolkien sought for him in vain. Then it seemed to the people of Valinor that the light of the trees was dimmed, and the shadow of all standing things grew longer and darker in that time. It is told that for a time Melkor was not seen again in Valinor, nor was any rumor heard of him, until suddenly he came to Formenos and spoke with Fëanor before his door. Friendship he feigned with cunning argument, urging him to his former thought of flight from the trammels of the Valar. And he said, "Behold the truth of all that I have spoken, and how thou art banished unjustly. But if the heart of Fëanor is yet free and bold as were his words in Tirion, then I will aid him and bring him far from this narrow land. For am I not Vala also? Yeah, and yea." I'm a Oh, hello, Zeno. Congratulations. Good job, and welcome to the stream. Now Fëanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mandos, and he looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. And Melkor, seeing that Fëanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last, "Here is a strong place, and well guarded, but think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the reach of the Valar." But his cunning overreached his aim. His words touched too deep, and awoke a fire more fierce than he desired. And Fëanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance, and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Then hate overcame Fëanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor and bade him be gone, saying, "Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail crow of Mandos." And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. Then Melkor departed in shame, for he was himself in peril, and he saw not his time yet for revenge. But his heart was black with anger, and Finwë was filled with great fear, and in haste he sent messengers to Manwë and Valmar. Now the Valar were sitting in council before their gates, fearing the lengthening of the shadows, when the messengers came from Formenos. At once Orome and Tolkien sprang up, but even as they set out in pursuit, messengers came from Eldamar, telling that Melkor had fled through the Kalasira, and from the hill of Tuna the elves had seen him pass in wrath as a thundercloud, and they said that he had turned northward, for the Teleri and Aqualonde had seen his shadow going by their haven towards Ahriman. Thus Melkor departed from Valinor, and for a while the two trees shone again unshadowed, and the land was filled with light. But the Valar sought in vain tidings for their enemy, and as a cloud far off that looms ever higher, borne upon a slow cold wind, a doubt now marred the joy of all the dwellers in Aman, dreading they knew not the evil that might yet come. Katsuki. Oh. Welcome, Cygnus. Thanks for joining us. We are now on Chapter 8 of The Darkening of Valinor. So Melkor has escaped. He turned a bunch of the elves against each other. Even though the Valar now know that's what he was doing, the elves have still... Fëanor and Fingolfin now basically hate each other. And their kids aren't going to get along either. When Manwë heard of the ways that Melkor had taken, it seemed plain to him that he proposed to escape to his old strongholds in the north of Middle-earth, and Orome and Tolkien went with all speed northward, seeking to overtake him if they might. But they found no trace or rumor of him beyond the shores of the Teleri, and the unpeopled wastes that drew near to the ice. Thereafter the watch was redoubled along the northern fences of Aman, but to no purpose, for ere ever the pursuit set out, Melkor had turned back, and in secrecy passed away far to the south, for he was as yet as one of the Valar, and could change his form, or walk unclad, as could his brethren, though that power he was soon to lose forever. Thus unseen he came at last to the dark region of Avathar. That narrow land lay south of the Bay of Eldamar, beneath the eastern feet of the Pelori, and its long and mournful shores stretched away into the south, lightless and unexplored. There, beneath the sheer walls of the mountain and the cold dark sea, the shadows were deepest and thickest in the world, and there in Avathar, secret and unknown, Ungoliant had made her abode. So he pretended to go north and travel across the sea, and that's where the gods followed him, but he secretly doubled back and went all the way south to the southern end of Aman, where nobody lives, and the mountains are full of darkness and shadows and secrets, and that's where Ungoliant is. We're about to learn who that is. The Eldar knew not whence she came, but some have said that in ages long before she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda, when Melkor first looked down in envy upon the kingdom of Manwë. And in the beginning, she was one of those he corrupted to his service. But she had disowned her master, desiring to be mistress of her own lust, taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. And she fled to the south, escaping the assaults of the Valar and the hunters of Arome, for their vigilance had ever been to the north, and the south was long unheeded. There she had crept towards the light of the blessed realm, for she hungered for light, and hated it. In a ravine she lived, and took the shape as a spider of monstrous form, weaving her black webs in a cleft of mountains. There she sucked up all light she could find, and spun it forth again in dark nets of strangling gloom, until no light more could come to her abode, and she was famished. So, Ungoliant is a creature of darkness that has decided to take form as a spider. All of the spiders of Middle-earth descend from Ungoliant. The most famous is, of course, Shelob from Lord of the Rings. That is one of her many descendants, but there's quite a few more. There's a lot of theories as to why giant spiders exist in his universe. He was bitten as a kid, if I remember correctly, and had a really horrible, injury or reaction to the bite. And so there's theories that giant insects are, a great fear of his because of that experience. I don't know, maybe. Also, just giant spiders are really horrible to imagine. But the first spider was Ungoliant. And technically, she is not an actual spider creature. She's more like an unholy dark like a Lovecraftian thing that decided to take form as a spider, and all her descendants will also be spiders. Now Melkor came to Avathar and sought her out, and he put on again the form he had worn as the tyrant of Utumno, a dark lord, tall and terrible. In that form he remained ever after. There in the black shadows, beyond the sight even of Manwë in his highest halls, Melkor with Ungoliant plotted his revenge. But when Ungoliant understood the purpose of Melkor, she was torn between lust and great fear, for she was loath to dare the perils of Aman and the power of the dreadful lords, and she would not stir from her hiding. Therefore Melkor said to her, "Do as I bid, and if thou hunger still when all is done, then I will give thee whatsoever thy lust may demand, yea, with both hands." Lightly he made this vow as he ever did, and he laughed in his heart. Thus did the great thief set his lure for the lesser. A cloak of darkness she wove about them when Melkor and Ungoliant set forth, an unlight, in which things seemed to be no more, and which eyes could not pierce, for it was void. Then slowly she wrought her webs, rope by rope, from cleft to cleft, from jutting rock to pinnacle of stone, ever climbing upwards, crawling and clinging, until at last she reached the very summit of Hiarmentir, the highest mountain in that region of the world, far south of great Tanaquetil. There the Valar were not vigilant, for west of the Pelori was an empty land in twilight, and eastward the mountains looked out save for forgotten Avathar, only upon the dim waters of the pathless sea. But now upon the mountain top dark lay Ungoliant, and she made a ladder of woven ropes and cast it down, and Melkor climbed upon it and came to that high place and stood beside her, looking down upon the guarded realm. Below them lay the woods of Arome, and westward shimmered the fields and pastures of Yavanna, gold beneath the tall wheat of the gods. But Melkor looked north and saw afar the shining plain, and the silver domes of Valmar gleamed in the mingling lights of the trees of Telperion and Laurelin. Then Melkor laughed aloud and leapt swiftly down the long western slopes, and Ungoliant was at his side, and her darkness covered them. Now it was a time of festival, as Melkor knew well, though all tides and seasons were at the will of the Valar, and in Valinor there was no winter of death, Nonetheless, they dwelt then in the kingdom of Arda, and that was but a small realm in the halls of Ea, whose life is time, which flows ever from the first note to the last chord of Eru. And even as it was the delight of the Valar, as is told in the Ainulindale, I think, to clothe themselves as in vesture in the forms of the children of Ilúvatar, as also did they eat and drink, and gather the fruits of Yavanna from the earth, which under Eru they had made. Therefore Yavanna set times for the flowering and ripening of all things that grew in Valinor, and at each first gathering of fruits Manwë made a high feast for the praising of Eru, when all the peoples of Valinor poured forth their joy in music and song upon Tanaquedel. This now was the hour, and Manwë decreed a feast more glorious than any that had been held since the coming of the Eldar to Aman. For though the escape of Melkor portended toils and sorrows to come, and indeed none could tell what further hurts would be done to Arda ere he could be subdued again, at this time Manwë designed to heal the evil that had arisen among the Noldor, and all were bidden to come to his halls upon Tanaquedel, there to put aside the griefs that lay between their princes, and forget utterly the lies of their enemy. There came the Vanyar, and there came the Noldor of Tirion, and the Maiar were gathered together, and the Valar were arrayed in their beauty and majesty, and they sang before Manwë and Varda in their lofty halls, or danced upon the green slopes of the mountain that looked west toward the trees. And that day the streets of Valmar were empty, and the stairs of Tirion were silent, and all the land lay sleeping in peace. Only the Teleri beyond the mountains still sang upon the shores of the seas, for they reckoned little of seasons or times, and gave no thought to the cares of the rulers of Arda, or the shadow that had fallen on Valinor, for it had not touched them as yet. One thing only marred the design of Manwë. Fëanor came indeed, for him alone Manwë had commanded to come, but Finwë came not, nor any of the Noldor of Formenos. For said Finwë, while the ban lasts upon Fëanor my son, that he may not go to Tirion, I hold myself unkinged, and I will not meet my people. And Fëanor came not in raiment of festival, and he wore no ornament, neither silver nor gold nor any gem, and he denied the sight of the Silmarils to the Valar and the Eldar, and left them locked in Formenos in their chamber of iron. Nevertheless, he met Fingolfin before the throne of Manwë, and was reconciled in word, and Fingolfin said it not the unsheathing of the sword. For Fingolfin held forth his hand, saying, As I promised, I do now, I release thee, and remember no grievance. Then Fëanor took his hand in silence, but Fingolfin said, Half-brother in blood, full brother in heart will I be. Thou shalt lead, and I will follow. May no grief divide us. I hear thee, said Fëanor, so be it. But they did not know the meaning that their words would bear. So to take a moment. So, Melkor spread all these lies. He got Fëanor and his family banished. And Fëanor's dad, Finwë, went with them in banishment because he loves his son. So now Melkor has escaped south and met up with Ungoliant, and they're coming into making plans for revenge. And on this evening, unfortunately, all the gods have put together this huge party to say, hey, let's make peace. And they've summoned every freaking elf in the area to come hang out with them to try to make peace between Fëanor and his brothers. And so Fëanor is there, his brothers are there, they're kind of making peace, and Fingolfin swears, wherever you shall go, I shall follow. He shouldn't have said that. But even though they went to this big party, his dad, Finwë, didn't go because his dad still is angry about the fact that his son was banished. So basically the whole island is in this one town having this great party, and Melkor is about to take advantage of their distraction. It is told that even as Fëanor and Fingolfin stood before Manwë, there came the mingling of the lights when both trees were shining, and the silent city of Valmar was filled with a radiance of silver and gold. And in that very hour, Melkor and Ungoliant came hastening over the fields of Valinor, as the shadow of a black cloud upon the wind fleets over the sunlit earth, and they came before the green mound Azelohar. Then the unlight of Ungoliant rose up even to the roots of the trees, and Melkor sprang upon the mound, and with his black spear he smote each tree to its core, wounding them deep, and their sap poured forth as if it were blood, and was spilled upon the ground. But Ungoliant sucked it up, and going then from tree to tree, set her black beak to their wounds till they were drained. And the poison of death that was in her went into their tissues and withered them, root, branch, and leaf, and they died. And still she thirsted, and going to the wells of Varda, she drank them dry. But Ungoliant belched forth black vapors as she drank, and swelled to a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor was afraid. So the great darkness fell upon Valinor. Of the deeds of that day much is told in the Alduldene, that Elmere of the Vanyar made and is known to all the Eldar. Yet no song or tale could contain all the grief and terror that then befell. The light failed, but the darkness that followed was more than loss of light. In that hour was made a darkness that seemed not lack of a thing, but of being... that seemed not lack, but a thing with being of its own, for it was indeed made by malice out of light, and it had power to pierce the eye, and to enter heart and mind, and strangle the very will. Varda looked down from Tanaquetil, and beheld the shadows soaring up in sudden towers of gloom. Valmar had foundered in a deep sea of night. Soon the holy mountain stood alone at a last island in a world that was drowned. All song ceased. There was silence in Valinor, and no sound could be heard, save only from afar there came on the wind, through the pass of the mountains, the wailing of the Teleri like the cold cry of gulls. For it blew chill from the east in that hour, and the vast shadows of the sea were rolled against the walls of the shore. But Manwë from his high seat looked out, and his eyes alone pierced through the night, until they saw a darkness beyond dark which could not penetrate, huge but far away, moving now northward with great speed, and he knew that Melkor had come and gone. Then the pursuit was begun, and the earth shook beneath the horses of the host of Arome, and the fire that was stricken from the hooves of Nahar was the first light that returned to Valinor. But so soon as they came up with the cloud of Ungoliant, the riders of the Valar were blinded and dismayed, and they were scattered, and went they knew not whither, and the sound of the Valaroma faltered and failed. And Tolkien was as one caught in a black net at night, and he stood powerless and beat the air in vain. But when the darkness had passed, it was too late. Melkor had gone whither he would, and his vengeance was achieved. So, yeah, the trees were totally destroyed. Which means that the supreme beautiful light, the light of the gods, the light of creation, now only exists in the 3 Silmarils, because the fancy rocks that Fëanor created were made from the trees, and now the trees are dead. Chapter 9 of The Flight of the Noldor. After a time, a great concourse gathered about the Ring of Doom, and the Valar sat in shadow, for it was night. But the stars of Varda now glimmered overhead, and the air was clear, for the winds of Manwë had driven away the vapors of death, and rolled back the shadows of the sea. Then Yavanna arose and stood upon Azelohar, the green mound, but it was bare now and black, and she laid her hands upon the trees, but they were dead and dark, and each branch that she touched broke and fell lifeless at her feet. Then many voices were lifted in lamentation, and it seemed to those that mourned that they had drained to the dregs the cups of woe that Melkor had filled for them. But it was not so. Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, "The light of the trees has passed away, and lives now only in the Silmarils of Fëanor. Foresighted was he. Even for those who are mighty under Ilúvatar, there is some work that they may accomplish once and once only. The light of the trees I brought into being, and within Ea I can do so never again. Yet had I but a little of that light, I could recall life to the trees ere their roots decay, and then our hurt should be healed, and the malice of Melkor be confounded." Then Manwë spoke and said, "Hearest thou, Fëanor, son of Finwë, the words of Yavanna? Will thou grant what she would ask?" Do you think he's going to grant it? You think he's going to give away the greatest creation he ever made? There was silence, but Fëanor answered no word. Then Tolkien cried, "Speak, O Noldo, yea or nay. But who shall deny Yavanna? And did not the light of the Silmarils come from her work in the beginning?" But Eöl the Maker said, "Be not hasty. We ask a greater thing than thou knowest. Let him have peace yet a while." But Fëanor spoke then and cried bitterly. For the less even as for the greater, there is some deed that he may accomplish but once only, and in that deed his heart shall rest. It may be that I can unlock my jewels, but never again shall I make their like. And if I must break them, I shall break my heart, and I shall be slain, first of all the Eldar in Aman. Not the first, said Mandos, but they did not understand his word. Mandos is the god of death. Up to this point, no one has died. But Fëanor says this, and Mandos says not the first. Who wasn't at the party? Again there was silence while Fëanor brooded in the dark. It seemed to him that he was beset in a ring of enemies, and the words of Melkor returned to him, saying the Silmarils were not safe if the Valar would possess them. And is he not Vala as they? And his thought, and does he not understand their hearts? A thief shall reveal thieves. Then he cried aloud, this thing I will not do of free will, but if the Valar will constrain me, then shall I know indeed that Melkor is of their kindred. Then Mandos said, thou hast spoken. And Nenya arose and went up onto Azelohar and cast back her grey hood, and with her tears washed away the defilements of Ungoliant, and she sang in mourning for the bitterness of the world and the marring of Arda. But even as Nenya mourned, there came messengers from Formenos, and they were Noldor and bore new tidings of evil, for they told of how a blind darkness came northward, and in the midst walked some power for which they had no name, and the darkness issued from it. But Melkor also was there, and he came to the house of Fëanor, and there he slew Finwë, king of the Noldor, before his doors, and spilled the first blood in the Blessed Realm. For Finwë alone had not fled from the horror of the dark. And then they told that Melkor had broken the stronghold of Formenos, taken all the jewels of the Noldor that were hoarded in that place, and the Silmarils were gone. So not only did he go and steal the fancy gems that everybody's now kind of arguing over, he killed Fëanor's dad, and this is the first elf to ever have died. Well, that's not true. It's the first one to be murdered, because Miriel died. Okay. Then Fëanor rose, and lifting up his hand before Manwë, he cursed Melkor, naming him Morgoth, the black foe of the world, and by that name only was he known to the Eldar ever after. And he cursed also the summons of Manwë and the hour in which he came to Tanaquedel, thinking in the madness of his rage and grief that had he been at Formenos, his strength would have availed more than to be slain also, as Melkor had purposed. Then Fëanor ran from the ring of doom and fled into the night. For his father was dearer to him than the light of Valinor or the peerless work of his hands. And who among sons of elves or men have held their fathers of greater worth? See, he wasn't all bad. He cared more about his dad than he did the rocks. Oh, bye Zeno, thanks for joining us. Many there grieved for the anguish of Fëanor, but his loss was not his alone. And Yavanna wept by the mound in fear that the darkness should swallow the last rays of the light of Valinor forever. For though the Valar did not yet understand fully what had befallen, they perceived that Melkor had called upon some aid that came from beyond Arda. The Silmarils had passed away, and all one it may seem whether Fëanor had said yea or nay to Yavanna. Yet had he said yea at the first, before the tidings came from Formenos, it may be that his deeds after would have been other than they were, but now the doom of the Noldor drew near. Meanwhile, Morgoth, escaping from the pursuit of the Valar, came to the wastes of Ahriman. This land lay northward between the mountains of the Pelori and the Great Sea, as Avathar lay to the south. But Ahriman was a wider land, and between the shores and the mountains were barren plains, ever colder as the ice drew near. Through this region Morgoth and Ungoliant passed in haste, and so came through the great mists of Oimire to the Helcraxare, and where the strait between Ahriman and Middle-earth was filled with grinding ice. And he crossed over and came back at last to the north of the outer lands. Together they went on, for Morgoth could not elude Ungoliant, and her cloud was still about him, and all her eyes were upon him. and they came to those lands that lay north of the Firth of Drengist. Now Morgoth was drawing near to the ruins of Angbad, where his great western stronghold had been, and Ungoliant perceived his heart, and knew that here he would seek to escape from her, and she stayed him, demanding that he fulfill his promise. "Blackheart," she said, "I have done thy bidding, but I hunger still." "What wouldst thou have more?" said Morgoth. "Dost thou desire all the world for thy belly? I did not vow to give thee that. I am its lord." "Not so much," said Ungoliant, "but thou hast a great treasure from Formenos. I will have all that, yea, with both hands shall give it." Then perforce Morgoth surrendered to her the gems that he bore with him, one by one and grudgingly, and she devoured them, and their beauty perished from the world. Huger and darker yet grew Ungoliant, but her lust was unsated. "With one hand thou givest," she said, "with the left only. Open thy right hand." In the right hand Morgoth held close the Silmarils, and though they were locked in a crystal casket, they had begun to burn him, and his hand was clenched in pain, but he would not open it. "Nay," he said, "thou hast had thy due, for with my power that I put into thee thy work was accomplished. I need thee no more. These things thou shalt not have nor see. I name them unto myself forever." But Ungoliant had grown great, and he less by the power that had gone out of him, and she rose against him, and her cloud closed about him, and she enmeshed him in a web of clinging thongs to strangle him. Then Morgoth set forth a terrible cry that echoed in the mountains. Therefore that region was called Lamoth, for the echoes of his voice dwelt there ever after, so that any who cried aloud in the land awoke them, and all the waste between the hills and the sea was filled with a clamor of voices in anguish. The cry of Morgoth in that hour was greater and most dreadful that was ever heard in the northern world. The mountains shook and the earth trembled, and rocks were riven asunder. Deep in forgotten places that cry was heard. Far beneath the ruined halls of Angbad, and vaults to which the Valar in the haste of their assault had not descended, Balrogs lurked still, awaiting ever the return of their lord. And now swiftly they arose, and passing over Hithlum they came to Lamoth as a tempest of fire. With their whips of flame they smote asunder the webs of Ungoliant, and she quailed and turned to flight, belching black vapors to cover her. And fleeing from the north she went down into Beleriand, and dwelt beneath Ered Gorgoroth, in the dark valley that was called after Nan Dubgorith, the Valley of Dreadful Death, because of the horror she bred there. For other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the dwelling of Angbad, and she mated with them and devoured them. And even after Ungoliant herself departed and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there and wove their hideous webs. Of the fate of Ungoliant no tale tells, yet some have said she ended long ago, when in her uttermost famine she devoured herself at last. So what are the theological implications of Ungoliant poisoning the trees? That's a deep question. It definitely represents, like, the passing of the perfect realm. There's always something that goes wrong. You know, Camelot falls, nothing beautiful, nothing gold can stay, and that's definitely what this is. The first elf is murdered, the trees are destroyed, Fëanor is now in his grief going to make some horrible decisions. This is the beginning of the end of the perfect era. And thus the fear of Yavanna, that the Silmarils would be swallowed up and fall into nothingness, did not come to pass, but they remained in the power of Morgoth, and he being freed gathered again all his servants he could find and came to the ruins of Angbad. There he dwelled anew his vast vaults and dungeons, and above their gates he reared the threefold peaks of Thangorodrim, and a great reek of dark smoke was ever wreathed about them. There countless became the hosts of his beasts and his demons, and the races of the orcs, bred long before, grew and multiplied in the bowels of the earth. Dark now fell the shadow on Beleriand, as is told thereafter. But in Angbad, Morgoth forged for himself a great crown of iron, and he called himself King of the World. In token of this, he set the Silmarils in his crown. His hands were burned black by the touch of these hallowed jewels, and black they remained ever after. nor was he ever free from the pain of the burning and the anger of the pain. That crown he never took from his head, though its weight became a deadly weariness. Never but once only. Go away. Never but once only did he depart for a while secretly from his domain in the north. Seldom indeed did he leave the deep places of his fortress, but governed his armies from his northern throne, and only once did he himself wield weapon while his realm lasted. For now, more than in the days of Autumno, ere his pride was humbled, his hatred devoured him, and in the domination of his servants and the inspiring of them with lust of evil, he spent his spirit. None the less his majesty as one of the Valar long remained, though turned to terror, and before his face all save the mightiest sank into a dark pit of fear. Now when it was known that Morgoth had escaped from Valinor and pursuit was unavailing, the Valar remained long seated in darkness in the Ring of Doom, and the Maiar and the Vanyar stood beside them and wept. But the Noldor, for the most part, returned to Tirion and mourned for the darkening of their fair city. Through the dim ravine of the Kalasira fogs drifted in from the shadowy seas and mantled its towers, and the lamp of the Minden burned pale in the gloom. Then suddenly Fëanor appeared in the city and called on all to come to the high court of the king upon the summit of Tuna. But the doom of banishment that had been laid upon him was not yet lifted, and he rebelled against the Valar. A great multitude gathered swiftly, therefore, to hear what he would say, and the hill and all the stairs and streets that climbed upon it were lit with the light of many torches that each one bore in hand. Fëanor was a master of words, and his tongue had great power over hearts when he would use it. And that night he made a speech before the Noldor, which they ever remembered. Fierce and fell were his words, and filled with anger and pride. And hearing them, the Noldor were stirred to madness. His wrath and his hate were given most to Morgoth, and yet well nigh all that he said came from the very lies of Morgoth himself. But he was distraught with grief for the slaying of his father, and anguished for the Silmarils. He claimed now the kingship of all the Noldor since Finwë was dead, and he scorned the decrees of the Valar. "Why, O people of the Noldor," he cried, "why should we longer serve the jealous Valar, who cannot keep us, nor even their own realm, secure from the enemy? And though he be now their foe, are not they and he of one kin? Vengeance calls me hence, but even were it otherwise, I would not dwell longer in the same land with the kin of my father's slayer and of the thief of my treasure. Yet I am not the only valiant in this valiant people. And have ye not all lost your king? And what else have ye not lost, cooped here in a narrow land between the mountains and the sea? Here once was light that the Valar begrudged to Middle-earth, but now dark levels all. Shall we mourn here deedless forever, a shadow folk, mist-haunting, dropping vain tears in the thankless sea? Or shall we return to our home? In Cuivenin sweet ran the waters under unclouded stars, and wide lands lay all about, where a free people might walk. There they lie still and await us who in our folly forsook them. Come away, let the cowards keep this city." Long he spoke, and ever he urged the Noldor to follow him and by their own prowess to win freedom and great realms in the lands of the east, before it was too late. For he echoed the lies of Melkor, that the Valar had cozened them and would hold them captive so that men might rule in Middle-earth. Many of the Eldar heard then for the first time of the aftercomers. "Fair shall the end be," he cried, "though long and hard shall be the road. Say farewell to bondage, but say farewell also to ease. Say farewell to the weak. Say farewell to your treasures. More still shall we make. Journey light, but bring with you your swords. For we will go further than Arome, endure longer than Tulkas. We will never turn back from pursuit. After Morgoth to the ends of the earth. War shall he have, and hatred undying. But when we have conquered and have regained the Silmarils, then we and we alone shall be lords of the unsullied light, and masters of the bliss and beauty of Arda. No other race shall oust us." Then Fëanor swore a terrible oath. His 7 sons leapt straightway to his side and took the self-same vow together, and red as blood shone their drawn swords in the glare of the torches. They swore an oath which none shall break, and none should take, by the name even of Ilúvatar, calling the everlasting dark upon them if they kept it not. And Manwë they named in witness, and Varda, and the hallowed mountain of Tanaquetil, vowing to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world, Vala, demon, elf, or man as yet unborn, or any creature, great or small, good or evil, that time should bring forth unto the end of days, whoso should hold or take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. Thus spoke Maedhros and Maglor and Celegorm, Carufin and Caranthir, Amrod and Amras, princes of the Noldor, and many quailed to hear the dread words. For so sworn, good or evil, an oath may not be broken, and it shall pursue Oathkeeper and Oathbreaker to the world's end. Fingolfin and Turgon his son therefore spoke against Fëanor, and fierce words awoke, so that once again wrath came near to the edge of swords. But Finarfin spoke softly, as was his wont, and sought to calm the Noldor, persuading them to pause and ponder ere deeds were done and that could not be undone. And Orodreth, alone of his sons, spoke in like manner. Finron was with Turgon, his friend, but Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor to stand that day, tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oaths she swore, but the words of Fëanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide unguarded lands, and to rule there a realm at her own will. Of like mind with Galadriel was Fingon, Fingolfin's son, being moved by Fëanor's words, though he loved him little. And with Fingon stood as they ever did, Angrod and Aegnor, sons of Finarfin, but these held their peace and spoke not against their fathers. So basically, all the various family trees of the Noldor are gathered together, making plans, figuring out what they're going to do. Fëanor is now technically king since his dad was murdered, and he's saying, fuck these guys, fuck this place, we're going to leave, we're going to go to Middle-earth and do our own thing. And also, he swears this magical oath to get back the Silmarils no matter the cost. His 7 sons also make this swear. The others do not. Only Fëanor and his sons make this terrible oath to chase after the Silmarils. But the group outside the Fëanor and his sons, the other brothers and their sons and daughters, are also talking about leaving Middle-earth together. So even though they may not have sworn to chase the Silmarils down, they still kind of want to leave. At length, after long debate, Fëanor prevailed, and the greater part of the Noldor there assembled, he set aflame with the desire of new things and strange countries. Therefore, when Finarfin spoke yet again for heed and delay, a great shout went up, "Nay, let us be gone." And straightway Fëanor and his sons began to prepare for the marching forth. Little foresight could there be for those who dared to take so dark a road. Yet all was done in overhaste, for Fëanor drove them on, fearing lest in the cooling of their hearts his words should wane and other counsels prevail. And for all his proud words he did not forget the power of the Valar. But from Valmar no message came, and Manwë was silent. He would not yet either forbid or hinder Fëanor's purpose. For the Valar were aggrieved that they were charged with evil intent to the Eldar, or that any were held captive by them against their will. Now they watched and waited, for they did not yet believe that Fëanor could hold the host of the Noldor to his will. And indeed, when Fëanor began the marshalling of the Noldor for their setting out, then at once dissension arose. For though he had brought the assembly in a mind to depart, by no means all were of a mind to take Fëanor as king. Greater love was given to Fingolfin and his sons, and his household and the most part of the dwellers in Tirion refused to renounce him if he would go with them. And thus at the last, as two divided hosts, the Noldor set forth upon their bitter road. Fëanor and his following were in the van, but the greater host came behind under Fingolfin, and he marched against his wisdom, because Fingon his son so urged him, and because he would not be sundered from his people that were eager to go, nor leave them to the rash counsels of Fëanor. Nor did he forget his words before the throne of Manwë, because he swore he was going to follow Fëanor. With Fingolfin went Finarfin also, and for like reasons, but most loath was he to depart. And of all the Noldor and Valinor, who were grown now to a great people, but one tithe refused to take the road, some for the love they bore to the Valar, some for the love of Tirion and the many things they'd made, none for fear of peril by the way. But even as the trumpet sang and Fëanor issued from the gates of Tirion, a messenger came at last from Manwë, saying, "Against the folly of Fëanor shall be set my counsel only. Go not forth, for the hour is evil, and your road leads to sorrow that ye do not foresee. No aid will the Valar lend you in this quest, but neither will they hinder you, for this ye shall know. As ye came freely hither, freely shall ye depart. But thou, Fëanor, Finwë's son, by thine oath art exiled. The lies of Melkor shall thou unlearn in bitterness. Vala is he, thou sayest. Then thou hast sworn in vain, for none of the Valar can thou overcome now or ever within the halls of Ea, not though Eru whom thou namest had made thee thrice greater than thou art." But Fëanor laughed and spoke not to the herald, but to the Noldor, saying, "So? Then will this valiant people send forth the heir of their king alone into banishment with his sons only, and return to their bondage? But if any will come with me, I say to them, is sorrow foreboded to you? But in Aman we have seen it. In Aman we have come through bliss to woe. The other now we will try, through sorrow to find joy or freedom at the least." Then turning to the herald he cried, "Say this to Manwë Sulimo, High King of Arda. If Fëanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him and sits not idle in grief. And it may be that Eru has set in me a fire greater than thou knowest. Such hurt at the least will I do to the foe of the Valar that even the mighty in the Ring of Doom shall wonder to hear it. Yea, in the end they shall follow me. Farewell." In that hour the voice of Fëanor grew so great and so potent that even the herald of the Valar bowed before him as one full answered, and departed, and the Noldor were overruled. Therefore they continued their march, and the house of Fëanor hastened before them along the coasts of Elendë, and not once did they turn their eyes back to Tirion on the green hill of Tuna. Slower and less eagerly came the host of Fingolfin after them. Of those Fingon was the foremost, but at the rear went Finarfin and Finrod, and many of the noblest and wisest of the Noldor, and often they looked behind them to see their fair city, until the lamp of the Mindon Adelvia was lost in the night. More than any other of the exiles, they carried thence memories of the bliss they had forsaken, and some even of the things that they had made there they took with them, a solace and a burden on the road. So the Ring of Doom is a actual, council circle. It's where all the gods sit and chill. It does sound, evil-ish, but no, Ring of Doom is where the gods sit. The guy's not wrong. I actually kind of really like Fëanor, because even though he definitely bites off more than he can chew, what are the gods doing about Melkor? They caught him once, and they let him run around and fuck shit up again, and then they let him go again, and they're still not going after him. At least Fëanor is trying to go after him. But the gods are just like, oh, he escaped again. Okay, he's gone. Bye. They're not... He has the light! How much easier would it be for all the Valar to go after him and catch him? And they did it before. They could go and get the Silmarils, but they don't, because they have their beautiful, peaceful little Aman, and they don't give a shit about anything that happens elsewhere. They just, obviously, after the first era, they don't care. Now Fëanor led the Noldor northward, because his first purpose was to follow Morgoth. Moreover, Tuna beneath Tanaquetil was set nigh to the girdle of Arda, and there the great sea was immeasurably wide, whereas ever northward the sundering seas grew narrower, as the wasteland of Ahriman and the coasts of Middle-earth drew together. See how much longer we have. Okay. But as the mind of Fëanor cooled and took counsel, he perceived overlate that all these great companies would never overcome the long leagues to the north, nor cross the seas at the last, save with the aid of ships. Yet it would need long time and toil to build so great a fleet, even were there any among the Noldor skilled in the craft. He resolved now, therefore, to persuade the Teleri, ever friends to the Noldor, to join with them, and in his rebellion he thought that thus the bliss of Valinor might be further diminished, and his power for war upon Morgoth be increased. He hastened then to Aqualonde, and spoke to the Teleri as he had spoken before in Tirion. But the Teleri were unmoved by aught that he could say. They were grieved indeed at the going of their kinsfolk and long friends, but would rather dissuade them than aid them, and no ship would they lend, nor help in the building against the will of the Valar. As for themselves, they desired now no other home but the strands of Eldamar, and no other lord than Olwë, prince of Aqualonde. and he had never lent ear to Morgoth nor welcomed him to his land, and he trusted still that Ulmo and the other great among the Valar would redress the hurts of Morgoth, and that night would pass yet to a new dawn. Then Fëanor grew wrathful, for he still feared delay, and hotly he spoke to Olwe. "You renounce your friendship even in the hour of our need," he said. "Yet you were glad indeed to receive our aid when you came at last to these shores, faint-hearted loiterers and well-nigh empty-handed. In huts on the beach would you be dwelling still, had not the Noldor carved out your haven and toiled upon your walls." But Olwe answered, "We renounce no friendship, but it may be the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly. And when the Noldor welcomed us and gave us aid, otherwise then you spoke. In the land of Aman we were to dwell forever, as brothers whose houses stand side by side. But as for our white ships, those you gave us not. We learned not that craft from the Noldor, but from the lords of the sea. And the white timbers we brought with our own hands, and the white sails were woven by our wives and daughters. Therefore we will neither give them nor sell them for any league or friendship. For I say to you, Fëanor, son of Finwë, these are to us as the gems of the Noldor, the works of our hearts whose like we shall not make again." Thereupon Fëanor left him and sat in dark thought beyond the walls of Aqualonde until his host was assembled. When he judged that his strength was enough, he went to the Haven of the Swans and began to man the ships that were anchored there and to take them by force. But the Teleri withstood him and cast many of the Noldor into sea. Then the swords were drawn, and a bitter fight was fought upon the ships, and about the lamplit quays and piers of the haven, and even upon the great arch of its gate. Thrice the people of Fëanor were driven back, and many were slain upon either side. But the vanguard of the Noldor were succored by Fingon with the foremost of his host of Fingolfin, who coming up found a battle joined and their kin failing, and rushed in before they knew rightly the cause of the quarrel. Some thought indeed the Teleri had sought to waylay the march of the Noldor at the bidding of the Valar. Thus at last the Teleri were overcome, and a great part of their mariners that dwelt in Aqualonde were wickedly slain. For the Noldor were become fierce and desperate, and the Teleri had less strength, and were armed for the most part but with slender bows. Then the Noldor drew away the white ships that manned their oars as best they might, and rowed them along the north coast, and Olwe called upon Osei, but he came not. For it was not permitted by the Valar that the flight of the Noldor should be hindered. But Unen wept for the mariners of the Teleri, and the sea rose in wrath against the slayers, so that many of the ships were wrecked and those in them drowned. Of the kinslaying at Aqualonde more is told in that lament which is named Noldolante, the fall of the Noldor, that Maglor made ere he was lost. None the less the greater part of the Noldor escaped, and when the storm was past they held on their course, some by ship and some by land, but the way was long and ever more evil as they went forward. After they had marched for a great while in the unmeasured night, they came at length to the northern confines of the guarded realm, upon the borders of the empty waste of Ereman were mountainous and cold. There they beheld suddenly a dark figure standing upon a high rock that looked upon the shore. Some say it was Mandos himself, and no lesser herald of Manwë. And they heard a loud voice, solemn and terrible, that bade them stand and give ear. Then all halted and stood still, and from end to end of the hosts of the Noldor the voice was heard, speaking the curse and prophecy, which is called the prophecy of the North and the doom of the Noldor. Much it foretold in dark words, which the Noldor understood not until the woes indeed after befell them. But all heard the curse that was uttered upon those that would not stay, nor seek the doom and pardon of the Valar. Tears unnumbered shall ye shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Fëanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it be laid also. Their oaths shall drive them and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed to you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief, and your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken. Then many quailed, but Fëanor hardened his heart and said, We have sworn, and not lightly. This oath we shall keep. We are threatened with many evils, and treason not least. But one thing is not said, that we shall suffer from cowardice, from cravens, or the fear of cravens. Therefore I say we shall go on, and this doom I add. The deeds that we shall do be the matter of song until the last days of Arda. But in that hour Finarfin forsook the march and turned back, being filled with grief, and with bitterness against the house of Fëanor, because of his kinship with Olwe of Aqualonde. And many of his people went with him, retracing their steps in sorrow, until they beheld once more the far beam of Minden upon Tuna, still shining in the night, and so came at last to Valinor. There they received the pardon of the Valar, and Finarfin was set to rule the remnant of the Noldor in the Blessed Realm. But his sons were not with them, for they would not forsake the sons of Fingolfin. And all Fingolfin's folk went forward still, feeling the constraint of their kinship and the will of Fëanor, and fearing to face the doom of the Valar, since not all of them had been guiltless in the kinslaying at Aqualonde. Moreover, Fingon and Turgon were bold and fiery of heart, and loath to abandon any task to which they had put their hands until the bitter end, if bitter it must be. So the main host held on, and swiftly the evil that was foretold began its work. The Noldor came at last into the north of Arda, and they saw the first teeth of the ice that floated in the sea, and knew that they were drawing nigh to Helcraxe. For between the land of Aman, that is in the north curved eastward, and the east shores of Endor, which is Middle-earth, that bore westward, there was a narrow strait, through which the chill waters of the encircling sea and the waves of the Beligare flowed together, and there were vast fogs and mists of deathly cold, and the sea streams were filled with clashing hills of ice and the grinding of ice deep sunken. Such was the Helcraxe, and there none yet had dared to tread, save the Valar only, and Ungoliant. Therefore Fëanor halted, and the Noldor debated what course they should now take. But they began to suffer anguish from the cold, and the clinging mist through which no gleam of star could pierce, and many repented of the road and began to murmur, especially those that followed Fingolfin, cursing Fëanor, and naming him as the cause of all the woes of the Eldar. But Fëanor, knowing all that was said, took counsel with his sons, and 2 courses only they saw to escape from Eramon and come into Endor, by the straits or by ship. But the Helcraxe they deemed impassable, where the ships were too few. Many had been lost upon the journey, and there remained now not enough to bear across all the great hosts together. Yet none were willing to abide upon the western coast, while others were ferried first. Already the fear of treachery was awake among the Noldor. Therefore it came into the hearts of Fëanor and his sons to seize all the ships and depart suddenly, for they had retained the mastery of the fleet since the Battle of the Haven, and it was manned only by those who had fought there and were bound to Fëanor. And as though it came at his call, there sprang up a wind from the northwest, and Fëanor slipped away secretly with all who he deemed true to him, and went aboard and put out to sea, and left Fingolfin in Araman. And since the sea there was narrow, steering east and somewhat south, he passed over without loss. And first of all the Noldor set foot once more upon the shores of Middle-earth, and the landing of Fëanor was at the mouth of the Firth, which was called Drengist, and ran into Dor-loman. But when they landed, Maedhros, eldest of his sons, and on a time the friend of Fingon, ere Morgoth's lies came between, spoke to Fëanor, saying, Now what ships and rowers will you spare to return, and whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon the Valiant? Then Fëanor laughed as one fey, and he cried, None and none. What I have left behind I count now no loss. Needless baggage on the road it is proved. Let those that cursed my name curse me still, and wind their way back to the cages of the Valar. Let the ships burn. Then Maedhros stood aside alone, but Fëanor caused fire to be set in the white ships of the Teleri. So in that place, which was called Losgar, at the outlet of the Firth of Drengis, ended the fairest vessels that ever sailed the sea, in a great burning, bright and terrible. And Fingolfin and his people saw the light afar off, red beneath the clouds, and they knew they were betrayed. This was the first fruits of the kinslaying and the doom of the Noldor. Then Fingolfin, seeing that Fëanor had left him to perish in Armon or return in shame to Valinor, was filled with bitterness. But he desired now as ever to come by some way to Middle-earth and meet Fëanor again. And he and his host wandered long in misery, but their valor and endurance grew with hardship. For they were a mighty people, the elder children undying of Eru Ilúvatar, but new come from the blessed realm, and not yet weary with the weariness of earth. The fire of their hearts was young, and led by Fingolfin and his sons, and by Finrod and Galadriel, they dared to pass into the bitterest north, and finding no other way, they endured at last the terror of the Helcraxare and the cruel hills of ice. Few of the deeds of the Noldor thereafter surpassed the desperate crossing in hardiness or woe. There Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, was lost, and many others perished also. And it was with a lessened host that Fingolfin set foot at last upon the outer lands. Small love for Fëanor or his sons had those that marched at last behind him, and blew their trumpets in Middle-earth at the first rising of the moon. So to summarize what has happened, Melkor destroyed the trees, he tricked everybody and kind of spread lies and turned them all against each other, and he stole the Silmarils, which are the last of the divine lights on Earth. Fëanor, being enraged by the murder of his dad and the theft of his greatest creation, he swears he's going to go after him and destroy him. In doing so, he breaks some laws, he breaks some rules, and he turns the Valar against him. So now everybody that's with him is doomed. He's already kind of gone a little off the edge. He's a little off the deep end with everything that's happened, and so he already has turned against his own team. There were the three brothers, Fingolfin, Finarfin, and Fëanor. Finarfin turned back as soon as he realized things had gone off the rails. So he and his family are still in Amon. Fingolfin and Fëanor pushed forward. They end up they take the boats from the sea elves, the Teleri, who refuse to help them out, so they end up fighting and killing one another. And that betrayal is what causes the Valar to curse them, the Kinslaying. They finally go further north with their boats and start to cross, and Fëanor, in his rage at being questioned by the others, he curses them and burns the boats. But Fingolfin, determined to go back to Middle-earth, says, well, fine, we're going to cross the ice, which is basically they walk across Antarctica to get to the other side, which is a huge tragedy. So many people die. Galadriel is on that path. She suffers through that walk, and they finally come to Middle-earth. So now, finally, we have Fëanor and his sons in Middle-earth, Maedhros being the best of them. Everybody likes Maedhros. He's the one that says, hey, we're going to take the boats back and help them, right? Like, he means well. His father has just totally lost it because of his grief, and because Melkor has been whispering in his ear all this time, making him not trust anybody. All he trusts is his family, and he's lost his beloved father. And then Fingolfin, of course, is now always kind of never been close to Fëanor, now feels incredibly betrayed by him. So we're now set up for the horrible things that will happen next, with the two clans of Fingolfin and Fëanor trying to make their life in the new world. I have to go now because my dog is barking, and I need to walk her. So I will see you guys next time. 3 p.m. today, I'll be reading The House of Fata Morgana, which is really great. You guys should definitely join if you can.